Let us pray. Our Father, we thank you for your abundant blessings to our province and to ourselves. We ask you to ensure to us your guidance and the will to follow it. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, with the support of my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, it gives me great pleasure today to introduce you, Mr. Speaker, and through you, to other members of the Assembly, a group of Canadians who are the unsung heroes, the invisible Sherpas of federal-provincial relations in Canada. They are my colleagues from days past, deputy ministers and senior officials from 8 provinces in Canada. They're in Edmonton today to prepare for the annual Premier's Conference that will take place in Edmonton this coming summer. I'd like to introduce them to you, Mr. Speaker, and ask them to stand together after I've done so. They are Hal Stanley from Newfoundland, Don McCormick from Prince Edward Island, Deanne Willamy from Quebec, Gary Posen from Ontario, Jim Eldridge and Michael Decter from Manitoba, Randy Harold from Saskatchewan, Professor Mel Smith from British Columbia, and 2 very, very fine participants, contributors to the Alberta Public Service, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Al MacDonald and Mrs. Orissia Lenny. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask them to rise, and I'd ask the Assembly to give them a warm, warm welcome.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of the House, a person visiting in your gallery. Mr. Speaker, the former MLA for Edmonton Whitemud, Mr. Peter Knack. It's nice to see Mr. Knack here observing the House at work. I ask him to rise and be recognized by the Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill Number 2, Department of Tourism Act. This being a money bill, Her Honor, the Honourable Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of its contents, recommends the same to the Assembly. This bill formally establishes the Department of Tourism as an important component in the government's overall commitment to economic diversification and job creation.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism has moved first reading of Bill Number 2, the Department of Tourism Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Department of Tourism Act, introduced by Honourable Mr. Fjordbotn, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being the Alberta the Alberta Development Fund Act, Bill number 227. This bill will restructure the present trust fund, creating 2 major divisions of the fund. One division would make long-term, fixed-rate, low-interest loans available to Alberta's farmers, independent business owners, and homeowners. The other would engage in equity investments in business, which would tend to strengthen and diversify the economy of Alberta. As well, the bill would appropriate to the restructured fund 40% of the non-renewable resource revenues received by the Crown. Require the Legislature's Investment Watchdog Committee to hold annual public hearings on the uses of the fund, and require any major fund investments to be approved by the Legislature.
The honourable member for Edmonton Kingsway has moved first reading of Bill number 227, Alberta Development Fund Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Alberta Development Fund Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. McEachern, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being the Alberta Economic Council Act, Bill number 242. The bill would establish a 30-person Alberta Economic Council composed of representatives of the various sectors of the Alberta economy. The Council would be charged with advising and recommending to the government strategies and policies by which Alberta can achieve the highest possible level of employment and efficient production to bring about a high and consistent rate of economic growth by which all Albertans may share in rising living standards.
The honourable member for Edmonton Kingsway has further moved first reading of Bill number 242, the Alberta Economic Council Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Alberta Economic Council Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. McEachern, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill 240, an act to amend the Clean Water Act. This bill gives the power to individuals to press charges on any polluter without the consent of the Attorney General.
The honourable member for Little Bow has moved first reading of Bill 240, the Right to Clean Water Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Right to Clean Water Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Speaker, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 230, an act to provide for equal pay for work of equal value. This bill would amend the Individual Rights Protection Act to provide that, quote, no employer shall establish or maintain a difference in the rate of pay between male and female employees employed in the same establishment who are performing work of equal or substantially equal value. If I may, Mr. Speaker, by way of explanation, also state that, as in the case in Manitoba, the first Canadian jurisdiction to introduce pay equity legislation, the bill provides for a three-part phase-in period, starting with persons employed in the Legislative Assembly Office and departments of government. The bill's provisions would thereafter be extended first to all other employees of the Crown in right of Alberta, then to private sector businesses contracting for the provision of goods and services with the Crown. No extension of the bill's provisions would be made without there first being a motion authorizing the extension passed by the Assembly.
Thank you. I believe the honourable member realizes that she really crammed more than sufficient amount of material into the introduction. The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill number 230, an act to provide for equal pay for work of equal value. All those in favour of first reading, please. All those opposed, carried.
A bill being an act to provide for equal pay for work of equal value, introduced by Honourable Member Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, that being Bill 234, Pollutant Spills Act, The bill would establish a duty in law to act in law by a person having control of a pollutant that is spilled, and would require that person in the event of a spill to do everything practicable to prevent, eliminate, and ameliorate the adverse effects of the spill. As well, that person would have to notify the environment minister and the local municipality immediately of the spill. Finally, the bill would establish an environment compensation board which would administer and adjudicate any claims for compensation arising out of sections of the bill establishing individuals' rights to claim compensation from a polluter or the Crown.
The honourable member for Edmonton Glengarry has moved first reading of Bill 234, Pollutant Spills Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Pollutant Spills Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Uni, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to file with the Legislative Assembly a series of reports pertaining to the Bow Old Man and South Saskatchewan rivers. The first report is titled The Limnological Characteristics of the Bow Old Man and South Saskatchewan Rivers 1979-82, Part 1. Second is titled The Limnological Characteristics of the Bow Old Man and South Saskatchewan Rivers 1979-82, Part 2. And the third is titled A Summary of Ecological Characteristics of the South Saskatchewan River Basin with specific reference to the Bow River 1979-82. Mr. Speaker, copies of these three important reports will be circulated to all members shortly.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table with the Assembly the annual report for the Health Disciplines Board for the year ending December 31st, 1985.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to file audited annual reports of Syncrude Canada Limited for the years 1982, 1983, 1984, and 1985.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the annual report for the Alberta Government Telephones for 1985.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly a special guest in the person of Mr. Angus Spence, Mayor of the town of Strathmore and member of its hospital board. I'll ask Mr. Spence to rise in the members' gallery and to receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature in the members' gallery 100 students from the Westlock Junior High School, accompanied by their teachers Marianne Holt, Kevin Hamilton, Bev Miller, Ed Metalis. I'd ask them now stand and that the legislature or the Assembly give them the customary welcome.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce 27 students from the grade 6 class at Laurier Heights School, located in the Edmonton-Glenora constituency. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Esther Woodrow, and I would ask them to rise and receive the customary welcome of this House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Energy. And it has to do with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington on June 6th passing a new ruling, Order 451, which decontrols all natural gas in the USIA, including the pre-1978 old gas. Mr. Speaker, this could have a disastrous effect on Canadian exporters, and my question is to the Minister, will the Minister outline his assessment of this government on the impact of Order 451 for this province, and could he then enlarge on what the government intends to do about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the Western Accord and the natural gas agreement, it is the intent to proceed with deregulation by November 1st, 1985, and we are moving, or 1986, and we are moving in that direction on the assumption that that will be the date for deregulation. But in the meantime, there will be the assessment of a number of decisions, including the one the Honourable Leader of the Opposition refers to, and including one yesterday from the National Energy Board related to transportation of the gas. So we are on an ongoing basis continuing to assess the different decisions over the course of the summer.
It's very nice, Mr. Speaker, but my question specifically, because this could be a very serious matter to the minister, something that's beyond our Western Accord, specifically, don't get excited, Premier, we'll get to you. Mr. Speaker, my question is simply this, specifically, what will the impact? Is there any assessment of the impact to our producers of this old gas decontrol and the subsequent removal thereafter of the low price cushion which allowed our more expensive gas to be rolled into the U.S. price? It certainly is going to have an impact. What's the assessment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the department is in an ongoing way assessing the different decisions that have been made, and certainly one would expect that if we made the decision to proceed to deregulation, not only in oil but in gas as well, that the marketplace will determine what the prices are going to be. And so we are looking at, as I said earlier, repeating myself again, that assessing the different decisions that have been made, but the decisions were made to deregulate the market on the oil and the gas side, and we're moving in that direction.
Supplementary question then to the minister. Is the minister then saying, other than us talking about our deregulation, that he has no idea of the impact of this recent move by the United States? Is that what he's saying to us?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I find it strange that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition hears things that weren't said. In terms of the different decisions that are being made, we are assessing on an ongoing basis the impact of those on total deregulation by November 1st, 1986.
Well, supplementary question then to the minister. We could continue this. Then what is the assessment? You say you're assessing it. In his studies with his department, and they have a lot of high-priced help in the United States, can the minister tell us what his assessment is? How is this going to hurt our Canadian producers? It's been already brought in on June the 6th.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to indicate assessments on a piecemeal basis for individual reports. All of them have to be taken together into account in coming to a decision as to whether or not November 1st, 1986 will be the date that we will be proceeding. And I'd be happy at a future time to provide members with the assessment that we have.
Supplementary question. Is the minister even aware of this particular
Leader
bill?
of the Opposition, you've had your three supplementaries. The Chair recognizes the member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy. Has the minister considered in his lemming-like dash to the sea of decontrol of gas prices just what the effect would be of selling cheap gas to the U.S. Versus to leaving the old contracts in place for our farmers and our consumers here in Alberta? What will be the difference we're going to be asking our residents to pay in order that he can sell decontrolled gas into the U.S.?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if anyone can give the response to that question right now. We are, as I said, assessing the situation as we go along and looking at the impact of the different decisions. And what else can one say?
Second question, Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier seemed to be anxious, so maybe we should let him have a chance to get on television. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. In the question period yesterday, the Premier seemed to indicate that the government is finally ready to concede that we got suckered in the Western Accord and that a new energy deal should be struck. My question is simply this. Has the Premier taken a leadership role in this area, and communicated directly to the Prime Minister in any way that a new energy agreement is necessary?
No, Mr. Speaker.
That's rather an interesting question. I thought this was the Premier of the province. It says that the economy is in disarray, and the question is to this Premier, a simple question that even the backbenchers will understand. Why not?
Because it's not necessary, Mr. Speaker.
Well, that's the people of Alberta will be interested in that answer, Mr. Speaker. Is the Premier saying that with the price as low as it is, and he said yesterday that there was probably a need to relook at it, it's not even worth his time to get on the phone and call Mr. Mulrooney to talk about this problem? Is that what the Premier is telling us?
That's not what I said, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question then to the Premier. He's to come back to the gas deregulation. Yesterday he was a little vague about this, but we're told that former Premier Lougheed, who could answer questions in the House, said that we should suspend the rush to deregulation. Yesterday the Premier was a little vague. Can he say specifically that it's still the policy of this government at this time to move towards gas deregulation? Is that still the policy of this government?
Mr. Speaker, that question was actually answered already by the Honourable Minister of Energy, so I assume the Leader is not only asking questions but trying to listen too. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is assessing the various matters involving gas deregulation, and as the Honourable Minister of Energy said, we would be explaining that to the House later. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition talks about getting on television. I might say that one of the more disgraceful exhibitions I've ever seen in a labour dispute is the Honourable Leader of the Opposition grandstanding on one. That's
Mr. Speaker, I think I have one. If we're going to have this type of debate, that had nothing to do with the question period, let's open it up, and we'll talk about why I was out on that picket line.
The chair recognizes that all honourable members realize exactly what's going on here, so we'd like to go on. I'll now recognize if anyone from the Liberal Party wishes to ask a supplementary question.
Order, Mr. Speaker. I have a point of order. I would like, Mr. Speaker, to have a ruling. That is a point of privilege. That had nothing to do with the question period. If he can make that comment, I should have an equal reply to those laws that caused me to be out there.
The chair recognizes the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that you did indeed make a comment about television. The Premier made a response. At this stage of the game, I think that both of you will allow us to continue with the business of the House. I do not recognize either point of privilege or point of order. Leader of the Liberal Party, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Premier, it'll give him a little more time to stay on television.
Allow the House to go along in that vein. Please ask your question.
All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. He's got the same hairline I have. Anyhow, Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Premier if indeed his idea is not to, or is to continue with the deregulation of prices, whether he is thinking of running for election in Toronto next time rather than Alberta.
Realize that now I will go on and recognize a member from the Representative Party if you have a supplementary on this issue. You do not. I now recognize the Leader of the Liberal Party for his main question.
You can't speak when you read.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the natives are a little restless over there today. I'd like to address this question to the to the Premier. It says last week Canada Packers laid off 100 workers in the latest series of reducing task force, laid off 100 workers in Lethbridge. Will the Premier or his Minister of Economic Development tell the legislature what efforts have been made by this government to safeguard the jobs in the meatpacking industry?
Mr. Speaker, there have been some considerable problems with the meatpacking industry in this province, and our government is doing everything we possibly can to maintain the health of that industry and also to maintain jobs for Albertans.
First supplemental, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear that because it's been recently reported to a federal tribunal that the importing of subsidized beef from the European community will result in the takeover by Canadian banks of 15% of the beef producers of Ontario and Alberta. Has the Premier or the Minister of Agriculture, or are they willing to tell the House, had any talks with the federal government on stopping the importation of cheap subsidized beef from Europe and cutting back our Alberta production?
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs filed with the House the communiques from the Western Premiers Conference, and the Honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon might review those to see that that item was dealt with there.
Sorry, Mr. Second supplementary. The item was not dealt with, it was mentioned. In other words, have you made a representation, Mr. Premier, have you made representation to your counterpart or to the Minister of Agriculture in Ottawa to stop or to curtail the further importation of subsidized beef from Europe?
Mr. Speaker, that's the communique carried that out to the Prime Minister.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
I'm still trying to pin our Premier down, Mr. Speaker. Issuing communiques to the press is like talking to Sheikh Yamani. You've got to get him on the phone. You've got the question, Mr. Speaker, is has he got on the phone either the Prime Minister of this country or the Minister of Agriculture and ask them whether they will stop the further importation of beef into Canada from Europe?
Mr. Speaker, that has been discussed, yes.
On this issue, the Chair recognizes the Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Cardston.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Premier as well, and it's with regards to free trade. I'd like to ask the Premier, first of all, why the Premier has decided not to take a more direct involvement in the discussions on free trade between Canada and the United States.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think all members know that the matter of free trade is an item for federal government jurisdiction. However, the provinces have some vital interests involved, and our government has been working very closely with the federal government. We have established our own trade commissioner. We have weekly meetings with the federal trade officials. We have ongoing meetings at the ministerial level with federal ministers on trade. We have an agreement to meet with the Prime Minister at least every 3 months on trade. We discuss the matter at the Premier's meeting, before the First Minister's meeting in Ottawa recently. We discussed it at the Western Premiers Conference. It will be discussed again in August as well at the Premiers Conference. There's a constant consultation and input from our government into the trade matters.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. In terms of decision-making, has the Premier empowered the federal government and Mr. Reisman to make commitments which could affect the interests of Alberta prior to consultation with the province or the Premier directly?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Premier. Could the Premier indicate whether there are any items that are priority on the table that would directly affect the economy or Alberta? And has the Premier asked that certain items not be on the table for discussion in those free trade talks.
Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure the honourable leader of the Representative Party would know, that when you're in the middle of negotiations, you don't make public in advance your positions.
And a supplementary, supplementary member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Premier, recently you have been quoted as saying that the free trade talks with the U.S. should be postponed till after the upcoming congressional elections. Is this a new policy, or is this, I understand this to be a new government policy as far as trade talks are concerned? Have you recommended this to Ottawa?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the member from Westlock Sturgeon raising this matter, because I think it should be explained, as the quote he made, he just referred to, I think was an inaccurate one. The position I've taken is that one of the first matters that the Ambassador Reisman should establish is whether or not the United States sufficiently have their house in order that they can carry on meaningful trade negotiations. If over the next 2 or 3 months he establishes that they can't, because of the various protectionist moves that are going on in the United States, because of their elections, their congressional elections, then I think it's meaningless to carry them on until after those elections. And I've expressed that with other First Ministers, and I think they have a general agreement, general feeling in accord with that, that it would be silly to try and negotiate with someone who's unable really to negotiate.
Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. At one time, the Premier took a very tough stand that there should be provincial participation, which I agreed with. It seems now that we don't have that provincial participation. My question is, how do we know then, how do the provinces know who are key players, what Mr. Reisman is putting on the table at these talks, and how it might affect Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, there was a debate on what was full provincial participation, and there was a split amongst provinces as to whether or not that meant having someone in the room looking over Mr. Reisman's shoulder. There was a general agreement that for a 3-month period at least, we would not have someone in the room looking over his shoulder, because in a way that weakens, they felt, many of the First Ministers felt, weakened his position as a negotiator. And that also reports coming back would be perhaps confusing. There would be Mr. Reisman's, there might be a different one from someone else. So we had a considerable debate on the matter. I'm not convinced that there shouldn't be at some time different arrangements, but we did agree as First Ministers with the Prime Minister to participate on this full consultation basis with reports back, being asked to deal with it that way for a period of time. And in order to be behind our federal government and allow them to go into the negotiations in the strongest possible position, we agreed with that.
Member for Cardston, followed by the member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Question, Mr. Speaker, a question to the Honourable Minister of Community and Occupational Health. I refer to the recent final report delivered by the McGill Inter-University Research Group under the Acid Deposition Research Program. This was a program initiated to study possible health problems in specific areas in southern Alberta. Does the Minister intend to institute the recommendations outlined in the report, specifically the one calling for the upgrading of registration of birth defects in the province?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I must say that in coming to grips with this rather difficult, complex subject, I would like to just pass along my thanks to the honourable member for Cardston, as well as his colleague, the minister for the member for Pincher Creek Crow's Nest, for their assistance in coming to grips with this complex matter. I can respond to that recommendation of the Spitzer study by saying that the government has 2 initiatives underway right now. One is a program that's been in place for a number of years in the Department of Community and Occupational Health and in the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care, and this is a hereditary diseases program which provides counseling to those families who've been affected by genetic disorders, and it also provides prenatal diagnosis to those families who are having a child. A second initiative is a pilot study that is underway, Mr. Speaker, by Dr. Brian Lowry from the University of Calgary to put in place just such a registry for a test area in southern Alberta. And Mr. Speaker, these two initiatives, combined with this recommendation that has been made by the Spitzer Group, is going to give us the information that's necessary to make the next step in deciding where we go on such a registry.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of the Environment. I refer to that same report and ask the question of him, does the Minister intend to follow the recommendations contained in that report that emission controls not be relaxed even though the report did not contain findings of excessive health problems?
Mr. Speaker, there's absolutely no question about changing the emission controls. Recommendation 1 in the report calls on us to continue a sustained policy of strict protection of the environment of Alberta. It is a sustained policy of strict protection that we will be continuing. Members may be interested in knowing that our standard is the highest in the country, and we allow no more than 0.17 parts per million of sulfur dioxide emissions in Alberta. Comparative figure in Ontario is 0.23 parts per million. We're at least 50% better than they are.
Supplementary member for Cardston. Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Environment, complimenting him on the low emission standards in Alberta, because Alberta is the only province in Canada that has a sulfur plant, so welcome. But has the Minister of Environment checked why or reconciled, or has his department reconciled the difference between this report that says that the gas emissions are not bothering the health of people and earlier ones that his own department did that said that white muscle disease in cattle is much more prevalent around the downwind side of sulfur plants? In other words, one is affecting cattle, the other is people.
You've now put 2 questions in. You're starting in on a third. I'll ask the Minister to respond to 1, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the recommendations put forward by the Blue Ribbon panel of national and North American experts with respect to this, the Spitzer report makes it very, very clear that it's very difficult to find a connection of the type being suggested by the member from West Loch Sturgeon. I'll answer the second question as well, Mr. Speaker. In terms of all the reports that are contained in the Department of the Environment, one of the high learning curve levels that the current minister is doing in the last several weeks is trying to work his way through all of these reports. I have no doubt at all that in ensuing weeks and months I'll be tabling all kinds of reports, and I'm sure I look forward to any type of debate that the member from West Loch Sturgeon would like to have with respect to this matter.
Supplemental on this issue, the member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you. For the Minister of the Environment, there was talk of the pollution from the gas plant itself, but not from the gas well flare-offs. So in addition to the recommendations made by the health study, is the Minister going to undertake or consider undertaking a study of the nature of pollutants stemming from sour gas well flare-offs and the short-term health hazards caused by those pollutants?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. I'd be delighted to undertake any further review, but the concluding sentence in the report, page 104 of this Blue Ribbon panel, says the investigators recommend that further clinical, epidemiological or demographic studies involving new data collection in the field not be done.
Member for Forest Lawn, Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by the member for Ponoka-Rimby.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, what is the position of this government with regard to yesterday's announcement by the National Energy Board that independent Alberta gas producers who are not part of the Top Gas Consortium and who are in no way responsible for the billions in debt piled up by TransCanada pipelines and the banks should now be asked to help pay off the Top Gas debt?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're assessing that.
Got a lot of assessing to do there. Yeah. Supplemental, Mr. Speaker. Does the government have any plan to protest the National Energy Board decision that the sharing of this top gas burden will only be imposed on Alberta producers and not on producers from Saskatchewan and British Columbia?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are having a lot of noise from across the way. I'm having difficulty. Noise pollution, I guess, is what it is. But, Mr. Speaker, we have had a very short time to review the implications of the NEB report that came out yesterday at 2:30 in the afternoon. And there are aspects of it that, on a first glimpse, appear to be balanced. However, there are implications with respect to the top gas charges that we are taking a close look at. And we haven't had time to assess the total implications of that. And when we do, we'll respond.
Further supplemental, and I expect I'll get the same non-answer, but during the National Energy Board hearings into this matter, the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission argued on the side of the pipeline, the banks and the consortium, and suggested that independent producers who didn't have anything to do with the debt should help to pay it off. Why did the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission, an Alberta government agency, take this position?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member gave me a lot of information there, and in terms of what the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission or others should or shouldn't have done, I haven't got an answer to that right now, but we'll take the question as notice.
I'll try with one last supplemental. The National Energy Board made clear in its decision that it does not have complete jurisdiction in this area and that the Alberta government will have to act to help implement it. Does the government plan to introduce legislation to help implement the National Energy Board decision?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member had been listening to my earlier answers, he wouldn't have had such a question. The decisions of the National Energy Board as of yesterday would be effective November 1st, 1986, when the system would be implemented with respect to their decisions. The recommendation was related to the top gas situation for the Alberta government and the BC government and the federal government to consider, and that's what we're doing.
Further supplementaries? Okay. The member for Ponoka-Rimby, followed by the member for Edmonton-Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to pose a question to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, some time ago, a major study was published entitled Partners in Education, this being related to the School Act. I wonder if the Minister could advise as to the status of this report and what, if any, further discussion is planned.
Mr. Speaker, since Partners in Education was released in February of 1985, it has received perhaps an unprecedented amount of public input from the public towards the development of a new school act for Alberta. I am in the process of reviewing that input, which has gone on in those ensuing 16 months, and the next step in the process will be to publish a comprehensive legislative framework which will contain the results of that public input, as was committed to in the speech from the throne on April the 3rd of this year.
A supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister advise as to whether or not there is the possibility of a school act being introduced during this session, a new school act?
I have no plans to introduce the new school act in this current session, Mr. Speaker.
One final supplementary then, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister indicate to the House at what time she feels the School Act might be introduced?
Mr. Speaker, I am personally aiming for spring of '87 to introduce that legislation. I think the commitment that this government has to education is extremely important. As a new minister, I want to be very comfortable with all of the matters which have been raised by the public before I put that piece of legislation before this Assembly.
Supplementary question, the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Minister of Education. During discussion of private school proposals late last year, the government circulated a document of proposals very narrowly amongst certain interested parties, which document was not available to members of the public. Is the minister prepared to ensure the House that any documents that are circulated as trial balloons with respect to proposed policies will be made available to all members of the public and not just a favored few?
Well, I welcome the honourable member from Calgary-Buffalo's question on the matter of private schools. I think it's a very important issue and one that I know he has a good deal of interest in. Certainly the matter of private schools and many others were part of the very comprehensive review in Partners in Education. I am committed to presenting to the public a legislative framework which will include those issues which will be raised in a new school act. And I will do that in as open a way as I possibly can.
Member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Would the Minister of Education indicate whether necessary amendments relating to the French minority language rights guaranteed by the Canadian Constitution, Section 23, passed by in 1981, be introduced with the Alberta School Act, and possibly, if sooner, as the Francophones are demanding in Alberta?
That's a very important matter, Mr. Speaker, and one which I am considering at the moment.
Member for Edmonton-Meadowlark, followed by the member for Edmonton-Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Provincial Treasurer has issued 8 provisional certificates of eligibility under the proposed Alberta Stock Savings Plan 1 to Brendan Ventures Limited. Given that the government is now reviewing the terms of the plan, how does the Provincial Treasurer intend to deal with the provisional certificates already issued?
Mr. Speaker, the government has issued 10 provisional certificates. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I think I've indicated in this Assembly before that, and the votes and proceedings, in fact, indicate that I have given notice to introduce a new legislation very soon, which will deal with the elements put forward in the, I think, a very appropriate bill put forward by my colleague, Mr. Hyman, which instills and encourages investment across a wide range of private sector opportunities in this province. And we'll bring that act back, Mr. Speaker. We are a government which listens to suggestions. We have talked to a variety of people over that period, have maintained contact with those people dealing with the issues, and I think we will bring forward some recommendations which will appropriately deal with the recommendations given to us, but in course will maintain the spirit and intent of that legislation.
Speaker, it's very difficult to determine 8 or 10 given that it's confidential information held by the Provincial Treasurer's own office. Is it not in order to withdraw the 8 provisional certificates of eligibility until such time, at least 7 of those 8, until such time as the government has finalized the terms of the plan?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is sending fears to the Investment Committee with this kind of comment. And that's exactly why we're trying to get the bill into the House as soon as possible. There'll be an adequate opportunity to see that bill and to debate the principles therein. But in the meantime, there's no confidentiality at all. You've got a research budget. You've been able to bring the information forward to this date. Carry on with it.
It's true. Supplementary? Supplementary?
The member, excuse us, please. The member for Edmonton-Meadowlark in the House is well aware of the fact that the chair is having great difficulty with the anticipation rule and the fact that the bill is on the order paper. So that I would ask the member for Edmonton-Meadowlark to very carefully frame this supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respect that ruling. I would like to point out that actions are being taken under that plan. What is the government's intention with respect to those people who have already been enticed into investing in Brendan on the strength of the earlier terms of the plan that are now under review?
Mr. Speaker, the people of Alberta know that this government is a government of its word. We will continue to our commitment to that legislation as my colleagues spelt out. Those people have no fear of losing their investment tax credits, nor does the company who's issued the prospectus have any fear of having this act retroactively affect their rights, as put in the legislation in early part of April. The people of Alberta and the investment community are secure in that knowledge, and secure in the knowledge that this government stands behind its commitment.
Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary is...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are the people of Alberta also secure in the knowledge that we will be paying $150,000 so that we can send $315,000 out of this province to be invested elsewhere, Mr. Speaker?
The Chair recognizes the member for Edmonton Strathcona to present the member's question, and followed by the member for Wainwright. Sorry, privilege. I'm sorry. The Chair has recognized the member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, Mr. Speaker, is directed to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. There appears, Mr. Speaker, to be a disturbing increase in the costs of testing for infectious diseases in Alberta, as more is done by private laboratories and less by the Provincial Laboratory of Public Health, amounting in some cases to between 1,000 and 2,000% increase in cost per test. Can the Minister outline the reasons for this change?
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps my honourable colleague, the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, might wish to supplement anything I might say. But we have in this province, Mr. Speaker, a first-class public health laboratory that undertakes that kind of diagnostic services and public health microbiology services. But we also have, Mr. Speaker, in this province, a very, very fine private sector that also is capable of doing an awful lot of that work. And the provincial laboratories, Mr. Speaker, are found in both Edmonton and in Calgary, and in the interests of serving the medical community both in those two larger communities, but more particularly in the smaller communities around the province, we are required to take advantage of the services that are offered by those private laboratories.
To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, that may be so, but at such an enormous increase in cost, why is the provincial laboratory not permitted to compete on equal terms, e.g. to have terminals in the hospitals, to have courier service? They're confined to service through the mail. The terms are not equal, and the increase in cost is phenomenal. Can the Minister please explain this, Mr. Speaker?
Good question.
Mr. Speaker, the public health laboratory is not confined to Her Majesty's mail. The laboratory has a budget of in excess of some $9 million that gives it an opportunity to compete as best as it can with those private laboratories. But, Mr. Speaker, that knowledge, that ability to deliver those services, the government doesn't have a monopoly on delivering the ability to deliver those services. Our private sector is very capable of doing an equally good job.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very glad to have that reply. I'm sure the provincial laboratory will be glad to have it too. But would the Minister outline his intentions regarding the further testing for infectious diseases, and whether the private laboratories will continue to do a larger and larger portion of the work, and what is the cost effectiveness of this? That is the question, Mr. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I guess I'm having a little trouble with the drift of the honourable member's questions, and perhaps I suppose that's right, but I'd be interested in having him put forward to me the concerns that he has with respect to those extra dollar costs, and if he has a problem with them, I'd be delighted to hear about it.
Supplementary, member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Yes, I should remind the Minister, Mr. Speaker, that I did write to him with these very points on the 9th of June 1986. Perhaps the mails have been slow. My final question, Mr. Speaker, is this, that he is doubtless aware that an affiliation agreement is coming up, is proposed between the Provincial Laboratory and the University of Alberta. Since the laboratory is as splendid as it is, and it truly is so, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister not consider establishing it on its own, with its own act, much as the Research Council has been?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the representations of the honourable member. It's a matter that, as he can well understand, it is something this is a new job for me. It is a matter that I'm looking at. I want to discuss with my colleagues. I appreciate the representations of the honourable member. I've only received his letter recently because it was directed to a different ministry, and I appreciate the representations. That and others will be taken into account as we make our decision.
Member for Wainwright, followed by the member for Edmonton-Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Agriculture, there was a recent announcement of a $54 million Ontario Pork Assistance Program. I was led to believe that with the signing of the National Tripart Red Meat Stabilization Program, that there would be no top loading, and there would be a 5-year phase-out period of the existing programs to put all the provinces on equal footing. How can Ontario introduce this program and stay within the confines of that agreement?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in response to the honourable member from Wainwright, I can indicate to him that the Ontario program is an extension of a program that they had introduced in 1984. And at first glance, it appears as if this is not top-loading. It is $49 million for upgrading or renovating of their facilities and a $5 billion marketing research grant.
Supplementary, then, do they have a similar program on the cattle section of that program?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of all the programs that they do have in the various provinces, other than to say that we in the province of Alberta can be very proud of the programs that we presently have in place for our agricultural sector, because they are second to none in all of Canada.
Supplementary, member for Wainwright. Chair recognizes the member for Edmonton-Belmont, followed by the member for Edmonton-Glengarry. Is this supplementary? Supplementary, the member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister concerning the tripartite red meat stabilization program. Can the Minister tell the Assembly just what would happen in the event of the anticipated low sign-up in response to the program here in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the hypothetical question, but let me...
Let's recognize the hypothetical question, therefore the question's out of order. Supplementary on this issue? The Chair now recognizes the member for Edmonton-Belmont.
Mr. Speaker, my question is directed to the Minister of Labour. Would he tell this House what considerations prevented this province adopting the 1983 Canadian Standards Association Code for amusement rides, leaving Albertans still covered by an outdated regulations of 1971?
Mr. Speaker, those were not provincial regulations. They were adopted as the basis for the inspections and procedures in this province, but they are not the only ones that are carried out.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I wonder, could the Minister indicate how widespread the situation is in Alberta, where amusement rides do not meet with the 1983 codes standards, which more closely reflect current technology in the area?
Mr. Speaker, the situation is that neither a 1971 nor 1983 codes would necessarily be adequate for all technological advances that are made. I presume the member is referring to the incident at West Edmonton Mall. That particular ride may well involve technology that was not available even in 1983. For that reason, we use the manuals that are prepared and the engineering studies prepared by the manufacturers in Germany.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering then, could the Minister indicate when we might expect to see legislation introduced to update the Alberta laws to the 1983 codes and any other codes that manufacturers may come out with?
Mr. Speaker, for one thing, we will be addressing the concerns and any recommendations that may be made by the review under the Public Inquiries Act. In addition, on an ongoing basis, we would, of course, in relation to any new equipment, look at the manufacturer's manuals for any new equipment subsequent to any subsequent consequential changes that are made as a result of the review by the public inquiry.
Mr.
Supplementary by the member for Edmonton Goldbar.
This is not entirely coming out of the Board of Inquiry. I'll ask the Minister if he has determined if the elevator and fixed conveyance inspectors in his department are qualified to inspect amusement rides, and if they have received any department-sponsored in-house or external training in this area.
Mr. Speaker, all of the inspection staff in the department, to my understanding, are qualified elevator mechanics. That is the only equivalent qualification that is available in the province, and to my understanding, all of them have that qualification.
We are now a number of minutes past the conclusion of question period. Again, the chair must apologize to members of the Assembly. On this day, we have at least 5 members who were not able to participate in question period. The chair takes all of that as a rather keen participation on the part of all members of the House with respect to this certain matter as listed in orders of the day. Orders of the day might, first might we grant permission of the Assembly to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care to make reply to a question as raised yesterday in question period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On yesterday, the honourable member from Calgary, Buffalo, raised a question with respect to a certain letter that was forwarded to the Honourable Premier by Dr. Christine Mason from Calgary, and I just wanted to refer firstly to the letter. I've now had an opportunity to review a copy of it, which was received in the Premier's office March 27th and replied to by his office on April the 3rd. That letter has also been circulated to another number of other ministers who have either replied or in the process of replying. The gist of the honourable member's question was what we were doing about the fact that, as the honourable member said, there's not one geriatric doctor in Calgary. The facts of the matter are, Mr. Speaker, the field of geriatric medicine as a specialty is relatively new in Canada, and there are not more than 2 doctors who have obtained that specialty in Alberta, and there are a number of provinces in Canada that have none. The real facts are that very close to 100% of the medical care of our senior citizens is carried out by doctors of other specialties, general practitioners, and others in the system. And in my review of the situation, the specialties and the medical practitioners in Calgary are doing an excellent job.
Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to introduction of special guests?
Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Assembly, I'd like to introduce 50 students of grade 6 in Legal School in a constituency just north of Edmonton. They are seated in the public gallery, accompanied by their teachers Eugene Krupa, Ernest Chauvet, and parents Wanda Nene and Donald Lassard. I would ask them to rise and to receive the greetings, the customary greetings of this legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly 35 students.
Please be seated.
Under orders of the day, government motions, motion number 2, the Honourable Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the messages of Her Honour, the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, the estimates and all matters connected therewith be referred to the Committee of Supply.
Opposed, please say no. The motion is carried.
Motion number 3, the Honourable Mr. Johnston.
Does the Assembly agree with the motion by the Honourable Provincial Treasurer? Opposed? Carried.
Motion number 4, the Honourable Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the messages of Her Honor, the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, the 1986-87 estimates of proposed investments of the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund, Capital Projects Division, and all matters connected therewith be referred to Committee of Supply.
Having heard the motion by the Honourable Provincial Treasurer, those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. The motion is carried.
Motion number 5, the Honourable Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Legislative Assembly do resolve itself into Committee of Supply when called to consider the 1986-87 estimates of proposed investments of the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund, Capital Projects Division.
Would those in favour of the motion by the Honourable Provincial Treasurer, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, if any? The motion is carried.
Motion number 6, Honourable Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Legislative Assembly approve in general the fiscal policies of the government. On April 10th of this year, the 1986 budget address was presented by our former colleague, the Honourable Lou Heineman. That evening, the Premier and certain members opposite praised Lou Heineman for his efforts as a dedicated member of this Assembly. I, too, want to thank him for his service to the people of Alberta and his stewardship of the public finances over 8 budgets. The fiscal proposals presented in April continue to represent the government's fiscal strategy. It is a balanced strategy that found the approval of the people of Alberta because it assists our vital agriculture and energy sectors, encourages job creation, strengthens Alberta economic base, and maintains top-quality people programs. Accordingly, tonight, I'm reintroducing our fiscal framework updated to include developments since April the 10th. First, I want to address what is foremost in the minds of most Albertans, the economy. It is clear that the uncertain oil situation, has many Albertans worried about their future. Alberta has an open economy. International developments in our key commodity markets affect us directly. The decline in world oil prices will temporarily dampen Alberta's economic growth this year. Nonetheless, with the economic momentum built up in 1985, I think real output of the Alberta economy will hold at last year's level. The rapid employment growth that Alberta experienced in the second half of 1985 and the first quarter of 1986 means that employment over the year should average slightly above the 1985 level. Alberta will continue to be among the leading provinces in terms of the number of persons employed as a percentage of the total working age population. The average unemployment rate for 1986 should be down somewhat from last year's level of 10.1%. Unfortunately, it is likely that the monthly unemployment rate will inch up as the adjustment to lower world oil prices works its way through the economy in the months ahead. Our fiscal plan for 1986-87 takes this into account and is designed to help support employment. Aggregate personal disposable income is projected to increase slightly faster than inflation. The growth in income is attributable to employment gains and moderate wage increases, offset in part by higher federal income taxes. Personal incomes in Alberta, after provincial taxes, will continue to be the highest in Canada. Consumer spending will continue to be a positive factor in Alberta's economic performance in 1986. In real terms, aggregate consumer expenditure should increase moderately this year, although not as fast as 1985. Per capita retail sales in Alberta will continue to be the highest in Canada. Oil and gas. The area of most uncertainty in Alberta's economic outlook is capital investment, particularly in the petroleum sector. We are all aware of the announced cutbacks in exploration budgets. Many oil companies are in a holding pattern leading up to the next drilling season. If, as we expect, there is an oil price rise in the fall that appears sustainable, energy-related investment will rebound. Moderating the present situation in the energy industry are the major activity-oriented programs introduced by this government. Last June, we announced the phasing down of royalty rates, new royalty holidays, and an increase in the royalty tax credit. In April of this year, we further increased the royalty tax credit, which is designed especially to help small producers. We also introduced, Mr. Speaker, the Exploratory Drilling Assistance Program. Earlier this month, we announced 3 more programs to assist the industry: the Development Drilling Assistance Program, the Well Servicing Assistance Program, and the Geophysical Assistance Program. Through this comprehensive package of programs, we have improved producers' cash flow, stimulated drilling, and protected jobs. The current problem of the oil and gas industry are a concern for Canada as well as Alberta. Energy self-sufficiency must continue to be the goal for Canada. We must not allow current low prices to reduce our development of new conventional and non-conventional energy supplies. Otherwise, we will be leaving ourselves vulnerable to foreign producers. We therefore call on the federal government to help assist this essential industry through this period of price uncertainty by eliminating the discriminatory petroleum and gas revenue tax. We also invite Ottawa to work with us to examine ways to back up Alberta's energy initiatives. Alberta has some major comparative cost advantages which will allow the industry to weather current difficulties and put it in a strong position as the oil market recovers. Our oil lifting costs make oil production economic even at low prices, and our relatively low conventional finding costs mean that our exploration activity will be maintained at higher levels than elsewhere in North America, and that Alberta will be a priority area in the search for new oil and gas supplies. Agriculture. As with the oil industry, the outlook for Alberta agriculture depends heavily on international developments. Substantial agricultural subsidies, such as those by the European Economic Community, have kept world farm products prices artificially low. Recent retaliatory action by the United States in the form of their 1985 Farm Bill has further depressed grain prices. As price takers in the world market, Alberta grain growers have already seen declines of 19 to 27% in Canadian Wheat Board initial payments. Federal-provincial cooperation is needed to help our grain farmers. Premier Getty and the Western Premiers have called for a major deficiency payment by the federal government. Our farmers and ranchers are receiving support in these times through this government's massive agricultural action plan. We are assisting in 2 basic ways. First, through income maintenance by establishing a safety net of stabilization and insurance programs, and second, through cost reductions of the major farm and ranch inputs, credit, fertilizer, and fuel. This government support, coupled with a return to normal crop yields, is projected to result in improvements in net farm income in 1986. Confidence in Alberta's future. Where does all this leave the average Albertan concerned about the future? First, we must not let short-term developments cloud our view of the long-term fundamentals. While there will likely be some fluctuation around recent low oil price levels over the next few months, we believe that there will be a firming in oil prices toward year-end, and that we will soon be over the worst. Oil is a depleting resource, and current price levels are stimulating worldwide demand. Alberta is in a prime position to take advantage of firmer markets. The longer-term prospects for agriculture are also promising. our farmers can compete internationally, and the world will continue to demand more agricultural products. We must continue to develop and apply new technology, liberalize trade, and market aggressively. Second, while Albertans cannot be fully shielded from international developments, no other government is doing more to protect its citizens from the uncertainties of world markets. Third, there are some encouraging economic signs. Lower interest rates, improved economic conditions for our major trading partners, and a much improved fiscal regime for the petroleum sector. And finally, Alberta's human resources are a fundamental strength. We Albertans have the staying power to see ourselves through this unsettled period and the talent to tackle the challenges ahead. Expenditure plan. In April, we tabled an expenditure plan suited to the economic circumstances. We proposed $10.7 billion in budgetary expenditure and $205 million in Heritage Fund capital project spending. Tonight, I am reintroducing those proposals and providing a roadmap document which translates them into the new departmental organization. Also, Mr. Speaker, I am proposing net additional budgetary spending of $149.5 million and increases in Heritage Fund capital projects of $31.2 million. This additional funding of over $180 million will further meet the needs of Albertans. Combined expenditure in 1986-87 is now estimated to be 5.3% above last year's forecast. In summary, our expenditure program for 1986 has the following main thrusts: assist our key agriculture and petroleum sectors, stimulate job creation, broaden our economic base, and maintain quality people programs. Before I go any further, Mr. Speaker, let me confirm that there are no tax increases or new taxes in this budget. Mr. Speaker, this was our commitment to the people of Alberta, and it has been met. Albertans are fortunate to have the most enviable tax environment in Canada. Albertans have the lowest personal income tax rate in Canada and pay no retail sales tax, unlike other residents of other provinces. As well, our citizens do not pay a gasoline tax. Alberta businesses also benefit from the most investment-oriented tax climate in Canada. While some other governments increase taxes in their budgets, we feel that Alberta taxes must be held level to encourage investment and consumption and thereby stimulate employment. Priority support for agriculture and energy. Agriculture and energy are Alberta's twin building blocks for the future. The fortunes of resource-based industries tend to be cyclical, a fact which has been largely forgotten over the past decade. Unfortunately, we are in a period where both our key sectors are in a cyclical downturn. This government has marshaled its financial strength to provide the needed support. In agriculture, we have launched a massive action plan to support our farmers and livestock producers. In total, this year's budget for agriculture is $595 million, up 86% from the comparable budget figure for 1985-86, and more than double the amount of 2 years ago. The highlights of our action plan for agriculture will include enhanced crop insurance and disaster assistance, red meat stabilization, feed grain price adjustment, the doubling of the subsidy for farm fuels, and the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program. I would stress that our innovative farm credit plan will provide fixed 9% low-cost financing for terms of up to 20 years. This will allow our farmers and ranchers to plan their credit costs with certainty. The statutory funding requirement for the interest rate relief is estimated at $25 million in 1986-87. For a description, Mr. Speaker, of the programs directed to agriculture, I would refer members to the separate budget document, Our Commitment to Agriculture, tabled on April the 10th. In addition to the programs listed here, the Heritage Fund will provide $30 million in 1986-87 as the first part
servicing segments of the petroleum industry. Through the initiatives taken by this government since last June, we have provided a fiscal regime and support plan which will safeguard our industry and stimulate jobs today. Jobs for Albertans. The unemployment level in this province is a paramount concern of this government. Jobs are essential to how people feel about themselves, their families, and their communities. There is no replacement for long-term productive employment. This government, working with the private sector, has done more than any other to help provide meaningful employment. The record speaks for itself. In 1984, we undertook a unique 30-month, $250 million enrichment for job creation and training programs. This year, $178 million is budgeted for nearly 24 programs, many directed at youth unemployment. The combined capital program of government departments, the Heritage Fund, the Capital Fund, and Crown corporations will total over $2.8 billion and will maintain or create thousands of jobs. The new $500 million Alberta Municipal Partnership in Local Employment Program and the new $10 million Heritage Fund Municipal Recreation Tourism Areas Program will help to create work across Alberta. As well, various programs to encourage small business, to foster research and technology will help generate employment. Broadening and strengthening our economic base. Long-term jobs will result from the government's efforts to expand Alberta's economic base. Our strategy is to build on strengths. Our small business sector is a definite strength. Small businesses are the economic innovators and prime creators of employment for Alberta. To assist small businesses in obtaining long-term fixed-rate financing, the government announced on April the 21st a $750 million loan program with interest rates fixed at 9% for terms up to 10 years. In 1986-87, this program is estimated to require $15 million in statutory funding. Through this program, we have removed the risk of interest rate fluctuations to give our small businesses a new measure of stability. We also propose to add $7.7 million to the budget for the Small Business Equity Corporations Program. This will reinstate sufficient funding authority to meet our legislated total commitments of $50 million. The private sector is the key to further diversification and long-term employment. Loan arrangements have been made with Procter & Gamble Cellulose Limited for upgrading its pulp mill in Grand Prairie and with Miller Western Industries Limited for a pulp mill in Whitecourt. In addition, the government has agreed to provide a loan guarantee for a magnesium plant near Alderside. A strong financial sector is another important element of economic development. To follow through on our commitment to a healthy provincial credit union system, the government, under existing statutory authority, will provide a $30 million advance to the Credit Union Stabilization Corporation. Research, tourism, and forestry are strengths of the Alberta economy. The new departments of Technology Research and Telecommunications, Tourism, and Forestry, Lands and Wildlife will spearhead the government's diversification thrusts. Quality services and facilities for Albertans. Albertans are fortunate to have access to the widest range of top-quality people program and facilities in Canada. For this fiscal year, we are budgeting $2.6 billion for health, with no increase in health care premiums. Highlights include planning funds for the Northern Alberta Children's Hospital, startup money for Western Canada's first heart and heart-lung transplant program, and a major increase to the Family and Community Support Services program. Education funding is budgeted at $2.5 billion in 1986-87. Our basic grants to school boards and post-secondary educational institutions will increase by 4%. Student financial support will remain the best in Canada. Other highlights include the funding for the new basics curriculum, matching grants for the revised Advanced Education Endowment Fund, and planning approval for new college facilities in Grand Prairie and at the Lakeland campus in Lloydminster. To help those Albertans who are disadvantaged and who require special support, we propose $1.2 billion in funding for a comprehensive range of social service programs. This will include major funding increases for the severely handicapped and daycare. This government has a steadfast commitment to Alberta's elderly. We will continue to provide them with unmatched health, shelter, and income assistance. Major initiatives this fiscal year include enhanced funding for the Seniors Home Improvement Program, the Home Care Funding Program, and nursing home quality improvements. In total, we will provide approximately $830 million in support for our elderly so they can live in dignity. Revenue. In the April 10th budget, forecasting revenue accurately was likened to hitting a moving target. It has proven to be an apt description. During the time the budget was being finalized, the spot price of the marker crude, West Texas Intermediate, dipped as low as $10 U.S. per barrel. In May, the price ventured into the $17 per U.S. per barrel range. These fluctuations have been large and unpredictable. We continue to feel that picking a single price in today's volatile environment would not be productive. Therefore, we are working from our basic assumption that resource revenue will be about one-third lower than last year. Since April the 10th, announcements have been made which affect resource royalties and which should be reflected in the revised financial plan. I am lowering our earlier revenue estimate by $242 million to reflect the royalty relief for Suncor and Husky and the June 4th package to help the geophysical, drilling, and service sectors. Our updated resource revenue estimate is now 39% below the 1985-86 forecast level. Combined revenue of the General Revenue Fund and the Heritage Fund is now forecast at $8.7 billion, which is 17.5% lower than the forecast for 1985-86. Financial plan. The amended revenue and expenditure estimates for 1986-87 result in a combined deficit of the General Revenue Fund and the Heritage Fund that is now estimated at $2.3 billion. The deficit is, in part, being financed by drawing down a portion of the assets of the General Revenue Fund. Net assets at the beginning of the year exceeded $900 million. We have also reactivated a Treasury bill program to complement our promissory note program. In addition, in May, we offered $200 million in Alberta bonds for sale in the Canadian market. Future borrowings will take place when and where market conditions are most favorable. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, this budget provides a balanced strategy for these uncertain times. It provides priority support for our vital job-producing agriculture and energy sectors. As well, jobs will be stimulated through the government's capital spending, special employment programs, and diversification efforts. All this is achieved without any tax increases. The budgetary deficit this year is large and cause for some concern, but it is manageable given Alberta's unique financial strength. We enter 1986-87 with an accumulated budgetary surplus of over $900 million and $12 billion in income-earning assets in the Heritage Fund. Our per capita debt level is by far the lowest of any Canadian government. Mr. Speaker, Albertans have the skills and determination, the abundant natural resources, and the financial strength to carry this province to the growth years that lie ahead.
Mr. Speaker, the last time I got up with a budget, the Premier went out and called an election. Now, I take it that I can beg leave to adjourn debate this time.
Having heard the motion by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, those in favour, please say aye. Aye. The members opposed, please say no. Motion is carried.
Mr. Speaker, I move the Assembly now adjourn until tomorrow afternoon at 2:30.
Does the Assembly agree with the motion by the Honourable Government House Leader? Any opposed? Carried. The Assembly stands adjourned until tomorrow afternoon at 2:30.